I knew the HOA in this neighborhood was bad, but I didn't expect them to be outright criminals. When I pulled into my driveway and saw nothing but rubble where my porch used to be, I thought I was seeing things. The wooden railing, the steps, the columns gone. Completely demolished. For a solid 10 seconds, I just stood there, gripping my truck's steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Then I saw her standing across the street, arms crossed, a smug look on her face. Whitney Ellis, the self-appointed queen of the HOA. I barely slammed the truck door shut before she sauntered over. "You're welcome," she said, her voice dripping with fake politeness. That porch was an eyesore, and it violated HOA regulations. I took the liberty of having it removed. I blinked at her, trying to process what I had just heard. "You took the liberty?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. "You demolished my porch without my permission?" Whitney sighed, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "It was non-compliant. The HOA board voted, and we decided it had to go." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. "Whitney, I built that porch with my own hands. It was well within property codes, and last I checked, the HOA has no authority to make structural changes to private property." She waved me off like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Oh, please. You should thank me. I saved you the trouble of fixing it to meet our standards." I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. "Who did you hire to do this?" She raised an eyebrow. "Why does it matter?" "Because they trespassed. That's illegal." Whitney actually laughed. "Oh, Frederick, don't be dramatic. It's just a porch. If you want to rebuild it, you can after submitting the proper paperwork and getting HOA approval, of course." I had never wanted to strangle someone more in my life. But instead of losing my temper, I exhaled slowly and nodded. "All right, you want to play this game? Fine." She gave me a condescending smile. "I knew you'd see reason." I didn't bother responding. I just turned on my heel and walked inside, my mind already racing. Because what Whitney didn't know was that I had been making some very interesting real estate investments over the past 6 months, including her entire street. And she was about to find out exactly what that meant. The next morning, I was already on the phone with my lawyer before the sun had fully risen. I paced my living room, staring out at the mess that used to be my porch. The destruction wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an act of trespassing and property damage. I wanted to know exactly how deep I could bury Whitney Ellis and her HOA in legal trouble. My attorney, Mark, didn't disappoint. After I explained what happened, he let out a low whistle. "She ordered demolition on private property without your consent? That's not just civil liability, that's criminal." I grinned at that. "I was hoping you'd say that. Send me all the documentation you have, property records, photos, any HOA correspondence. We're going to make this very painful for them." I ended the call, feeling a new fire in my belly. But I wasn't stopping at legal action. No, I had something much bigger in mind. I grabbed a folder from my desk one I had been putting together for months. Inside were deeds, contracts, and property records for half the homes on Whitney Street. Over the past 6 months, I had quietly been buying up rental properties in the neighborhood, including 3 houses right next to hers. And last week, I had finalized the purchase of the biggest property of them all, the one directly across from her, which also happened to be the home of another HOA board member. Whitney thought she controlled this neighborhood. She had no idea I was about to pull the rug out from under her. I spent the rest of the morning documenting everything. I took photos of the demolished porch, reviewed security footage from my cameras, and printed out every email I had ever received from the HOA. I even compiled a list of violations Whitney herself had committed because, of course, she didn't follow her own rules. Her lawn decorations alone violated half a dozen HOA regulations. By noon, I was ready to set my plan in motion. The first step was a visit to the city's building department. I walked in, placed my documents on the counter, and gave the clerk a friendly smile. "I need to file a complaint about an unauthorized demolition," I said. The clerk glanced at the papers and frowned. "This was done without a permit." "That's correct." She shook her head. "That's a major violation." "Who ordered it?" I handed her a copy of an HOA notice Whitney had sent me weeks ago, where she vaguely referenced enforcement actions against my property. It wasn't an outright admission, but it was enough to put her on the city's radar. The clerk nodded. "We'll be looking into this immediately." That was step 1. Step 2 was going to be even more satisfying. I drove straight to the HOA's scheduled board meeting that evening. Whitney and her cronies held their meetings in the clubhouse, a building funded entirely by resident fees. It was a place they used to issue fines, dictate new rules, and generally make everyone's lives miserable. I walked in, folder in hand, and took a seat at the front. The board members were mid-discussion about some nonsense landscaping rule when Whitney spotted me. Her expression faltered for just a second before she put on that fake, syrupy smile. "Frederick," she said, "I wasn't expecting you." I leaned back in my chair. I figured I'd stop by. After all, we have a lot to discuss. The other board members exchanged uncertain glances. Whitney, clearly trying to maintain control, cleared her throat. "Unless you have something relevant to the meeting agenda, you'll have to wait until the open forum." "Oh, I have something very relevant." I pulled out the first document and placed it on the table. "This is a formal cease and desist letter regarding the destruction of my property. My lawyer will be following up with legal action against the HOA and any individuals responsible for the unauthorized demolition." Whitney's face paled slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Oh, Frederick, let's not be hasty. We can discuss this privately." "No," I interrupted. "We'll discuss it now. In fact, while we're discussing things, let's talk about the building permit violations I reported to the city this morning. You did get a permit to demolish my porch, didn't you?" Silence. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. Whitney's jaw tightened. "I'll take that as a no," I said. "The city's going to love that." Whitney pressed her lips together. "This isn't the place for legal threats." I smiled. "You're right. Let's talk about something else then." I pulled out another document. "Like the fact that, as of last week, I own 6 properties on your street." That got a reaction. Several board members stiffened. Whitney's eyes snapped to mine, the first hint of real concern flickering in them. "What?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned forward. "I've been quietly buying up properties in this neighborhood. And since the HOA's voting rights are tied to property ownership, that means I now hold a significant portion of the votes." The realization hit her like a freight train. The HOA's power structure was built on homeowners voting and board members. With my recent acquisitions, I had just enough influence to challenge their control. One of the board members, a man named Greg, cleared his throat. "You can't just take over the HOA." I raised an eyebrow. "Can't I? The bylaws are very clear. Any homeowner with enough votes can propose changes, including removing board members." Whitney's hands clenched into fists. "This is ridiculous." "No, what's ridiculous is an HOA that thinks it can bulldoze people's property without consequence." I stood up, gathering my papers. "Consider this your warning. A special vote is coming, and I'll be making sure the entire neighborhood knows exactly what kind of leadership they've been dealing with." With that, I walked out, leaving them scrambling. Step 2 was complete. Step 3? That was going to be the best part. Because once I exposed them to the entire community, Whitney wouldn't just be out of power, she'd be the one answering for her crimes. As I walked out of the HOA meeting, I could feel every set of eyes burning into my back. The board members sat frozen in their seats, their carefully cultivated control slipping through their fingers. But I wasn't done, not by a long shot. By the time I got home, my phone was already blowing up. Messages from neighbors, some curious, others furious, all wanting to know what I meant about a special vote. It was exactly what I wanted. Whitney had ruled this HOA like a dictator for years, using fines and threats to keep everyone in line. Now, for the first time, she was the one on defense. I spent the next morning making calls. First to my lawyer, who assured me that the cease and desist letter had been properly served to the HOA. Then to a city inspector, who confirmed that an official investigation had been opened into the unauthorized demolition. That alone would send shockwaves through the board. But I wasn't just relying on legal action. I wanted the entire neighborhood to see Whitney for who she really was. By noon, I had a plan. I printed out copies of the security footage showing the demolition crew tearing apart my porch. Then I drafted an open letter to the community. In it, I detailed exactly what had happened, including the fact that the HOA had no authority to make structural changes to private property. I ended with an invitation to a community meeting at my house that weekend. I wasn't going to fight Whitney in the shadows. I was going to dismantle her power in front of everyone. That evening, I went door to door, handing out the letter. Most people were shocked to hear what had happened. Some were hesitant to speak out, but plenty were eager to see change. The HOA had been a thorn in everyone's side for years, and now they finally had a chance to do something about it. By the time I reached Whitney's house, I could already see her watching me from the window. She must have heard the commotion because she stormed out before I even reached her front step. She crossed her arms, glaring. "You're turning this neighborhood into a circus." I handed her a copy of the letter. "I'm making sure people know the truth." She snatched it, eyes scanning the page. "This is slander. It's all documented," I said. "You think people won't believe their own eyes?" Her mouth twisted, but she didn't argue. She knew she had overplayed her hand, and now she was scrambling. I turned to leave, but she grabbed my arm. "You're making a mistake. You think you can take over this HOA? You have no idea what you're up against." I pulled free. "Neither do you." The next 2 days were a whirlwind. The city inspector came by, taking photos of what was left of my porch and asking me to provide statements. I handed over every document I had. Meanwhile, word about the meeting spread fast. People who had never dared to speak out against the HOA were suddenly interested. By Saturday afternoon, my yard was packed. Neighbors stood in small clusters, murmuring to each other. Some had brought lawn chairs, others stood with their arms crossed, waiting to see what would happen. I had set up a small table with copies of the HOA bylaws and a petition for a vote to remove the board. When I stepped onto my porch, what was left of it, the crowd quieted. "Thanks for coming," I said. "I won't waste your time. You all know why we're here." A man near the front nodded. "We're sick of this HOA." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. I gestured toward the ruins of my porch. "This is what happens when power goes unchecked." The HOA didn't just fine me. They ordered my property destroyed. Without permission. Without legal authority. A woman near the back frowned. "They've been getting worse. Last year, they fined me for parking my own car in my driveway." Another neighbor spoke up. "They tried to make me repaint my house a color they liked." I held up the petition. "Then let's do something about it. The bylaws say that if enough homeowners vote, we can remove the board. We can elect people who actually care about this community." For a moment, there was silence. Then one man stepped forward and signed. Then another, and another. Whitney arrived just as the 15th signature hit the page. Her face was a mask of barely restrained fury. "This is an illegal gathering," she snapped. "You can't just—" I cut her off. "Actually, we can. The bylaws allow for a special vote if enough homeowners petition for one. And we're getting those signatures right now." She turned to the crowd. "You really want to put this neighborhood in the hands of someone like him?" A woman near the front, an older lady who had lived here for 20 years, crossed her arms. "I'd rather take my chances with him than keep dealing with you." More nods. More signatures. Whitney's face turned red. "This isn't over." I met her gaze. "You're right. The vote is in 2 weeks. And when it's done, you won't be in charge anymore." She didn't respond. She just turned on her heel and stormed away. By the end of the night, we had more than enough signatures. The special vote was happening, and Whitney Ellis was running out of time. The tension in the neighborhood had reached a boiling point. Ever since the petition for the special vote had been submitted, Whitney had been scrambling to maintain her grip on the HOA. The usual intimidation tactics were in full swing. Mysterious fines started appearing on the homes of those who had signed the petition. Letters threatening legal consequences for disruptive behavior were stuffed into mailboxes overnight. But it wasn't working. The neighborhood had seen the wreckage of my porch with their own eyes. They had listened as their fellow homeowners shared their own horror stories about Whitney's abuse of power. And now, with the vote looming, people weren't just angry, they were motivated. The final week before the vote, I was sitting in my living room, reviewing the bylaws one last time when there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Greg, one of the HOA board members, stood there, shifting uncomfortably. He had been one of Whitney's longtime allies, but something about his posture told me he wasn't here to cause trouble. He exhaled sharply before speaking. "We need to talk." I stepped aside, letting him in. He glanced around, clearly uneasy, before finally meeting my gaze. "I made a mistake backing Whitney," he admitted. "I thought she knew what she was doing, but this," he gestured toward my ruined porch. "This went too far." I studied him carefully. "You're just now realizing that?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "I didn't think she'd actually start tearing down people's property. She always pushed the rules, but this..." He trailed off. "Look, she's panicking. She's been making calls, trying to find a way to invalidate the vote. But the bylaws are clear. If the majority votes her out, she's gone." I crossed my arms. "So why are you here?" Greg hesitated. "She's planning something." I don't know the details, but she had a meeting with a lawyer yesterday. Whatever she's doing, it won't be legal, but she doesn't care. She's desperate. That wasn't surprising. Whitney had ruled this HOA like a queen, and now her throne was slipping away. I nodded slowly. Thanks for the warning. But if she tries anything illegal, it'll only make things worse for her. Greg sighed. Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of. After he left, I immediately got on the phone with Mark, my lawyer. If Whitney was trying to tamper with the vote, I needed to be ready. Mark assured me that any attempt to invalidate the petition or manipulate the election would be grounds for legal action. That was good to know, but I wasn't just going to sit back and wait for her to make a move. The next day, I paid a visit to the HOA's hired management company. While the board made the rules, the company handled the actual logistics, organizing finances, ensuring compliance with local laws, and, most importantly, overseeing official votes. I walked into their office and asked to speak with the regional director. After a few minutes, an older man in a suit emerged, eyeing me curiously. I assume this is about the HOA election, he asked. I nodded. I want to make sure everything is handled fairly. There have been concerns about interference. He exhaled through his nose. You're not the first to mention that. We've received multiple complaints about the board's actions recently. He gave me a sharp look. We've already assigned an independent auditor to oversee the vote. Any irregularities will be flagged immediately. That was exactly what I needed to hear. If Whitney was planning something, she wouldn't be able to get away with it under official scrutiny. The day of the vote arrived, and the tension was palpable. The HOA held the election in the clubhouse, where rows of chairs had been set up for homeowners to cast their ballots. The management company's auditors were present, monitoring every step of the process. Whitney was there, of course, standing off to the side with her arms crossed, watching everyone like a hawk. She didn't say a word to me, but the glare she shot in my direction promised that she wasn't going down without a fight. One by one, homeowners stepped forward, marking their ballots and dropping them into the sealed box. I could see the determination on their faces. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of them. When the last ballot was cast, the auditors immediately began counting. The room was silent except for the rustle of paper. Then, finally, the lead auditor cleared his throat and announced the results. The vote to remove the current HOA board has passed. A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Some people cheered, others just sighed in relief. Whitney's face turned an alarming shade of red. This is a joke, she snapped. You can't just throw me out. The auditor adjusted his glasses. Per your HOA bylaws, the homeowners have the right to vote for board members. The majority has voted for a new board. Your position is officially terminated. For a moment, Whitney just stood there, fist clenched. Then, without another word, she stormed out of the clubhouse. As she disappeared into the night, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. She was finally gone. But I knew Whitney Ellis. She wasn't the type to go down quietly, and something told me she wasn't finished just yet. The vote had been counted, and the board was officially removed. But Whitney Ellis was nowhere near finished. Anyone who had dealt with her long enough knew she didn't accept losses. She schemed, she manipulated, and she always found a way to claw back control. I wasn't about to let that happen. The morning after the vote, I was up early, setting things in motion. The newly elected board, which included a few of the more level-headed neighbors, was meeting for the first time that afternoon, and I wanted to be ready. The first order of business was making sure Whitney had no way to challenge the results. I met with Mark, my lawyer, at a nearby cafe. He had already begun filing paperwork to ensure the transition was legally binding and airtight. She's already contacted an attorney, he said, flipping through a folder. She's claiming the vote was manipulated. But with the auditors overseeing everything, she doesn't have a case. I leaned back, considering. That won't stop her from trying. She's desperate. Mark nodded, which is why I took an extra step. He slid a document across the table. I pulled the HOA's financial records. I raised an eyebrow. And there are discrepancies. That got my full attention. How bad? Bad enough that I suspect she's been skimming funds for years. He tapped the paper. There are payments to vendors that don't exist, maintenance fees that were never used for actual repairs, and a few large withdrawals she tried to categorize as administrative costs. I let out a low whistle. She's been stealing from the HOA. Looks that way. This was bigger than I expected. Not only had she abused her power, but she had also lined her own pockets in the process. That meant she wasn't just at risk of losing her control, she could be facing criminal charges. I wasted no time. By the time the new board gathered in the clubhouse that afternoon, I had copies of the financial reports in hand. The room was packed with homeowners eager to see what came next. I spread the documents across the table. We need to bring this to the authorities. One of the new board members, a retired accountant named Linda, adjusted her glasses as she studied the papers. This is blatant embezzlement. If she was taking money from HOA funds, she could be looking at prison time. Greg, the former board member who had warned me earlier, shifted uncomfortably. She always handled the finances herself. Said it was easier that way. Linda scoffed. Easier for her to steal, you mean? The rest of the board murmured in agreement. We have enough evidence, I said. We take this to the district attorney, and she won't just be out of power, she'll be in handcuffs. Someone cleared their throat near the door. I turned to see Whitney standing there, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. You think you've won, she said. Linda didn't look up from the papers. We don't think. We know. Whitney stepped forward, her eyes locking onto me. This is pathetic. You're trying to destroy everything I built. I folded my arms. You mean everything you stole? She flinched, but quickly masked it with anger. You're twisting things. I did what I had to do to keep this neighborhood running. Greg let out a bitter laugh. You mean you did what you had to do to keep yourself comfortable? Whitney ignored him, her focus still on me. You think these people are on your side? They'll turn on you the second you make a decision they don't like. I wasn't interested in her attempts to manipulate the situation. The difference is, I won't be making decisions alone. This HOA belongs to the homeowners, not one person. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in her eyes. She had ruled through fear for so long that the idea of homeowners actually having a say in things was completely foreign to her. Linda stood, holding up the financial records. Whitney, we're reporting this. You need to leave. Whitney's jaw clenched. You have no proof of anything. Linda smirked. We have enough to start an audit. You know what happens when the IRS gets involved? For the first time, she looked nervous. I stepped closer. You should start thinking about legal representation, because this isn't going away. Whitney's bravado cracked. She turned on her heel and stormed out. The moment she was gone, Linda exhaled sharply. We need to move fast. She'll try to cover her tracks. I nodded. Then let's make sure she doesn't get the chance. By the next morning, a formal complaint had been filed. The district attorney's office was reviewing the financial records, and an investigation was officially underway. Meanwhile, the HOA was already working to undo the mess Whitney had left behind, reducing unfair fines, reversing ridiculous regulations, and restoring trust in the community. Then, 2 days later, the news broke. Whitney Ellis had been arrested for fraud and embezzlement. The neighborhood was buzzing. Some people were shocked, others vindicated, but no one was surprised. The woman who had spent years bullying homeowners and ruining lives was finally facing real consequences. I stood on what was left of my porch, watching as a moving truck pulled up to Whitney's house. Her belongings were being packed up, her reign officially over. Greg walked up beside me, shaking his head. Never thought I'd see the day. I chuckled. Neither did she. As the last box was loaded into the truck, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Whitney Ellis had tried to control this neighborhood. She had thought she was untouchable. But in the end, justice had a way of catching up. The moving truck sat in Whitney's driveway for most of the morning. I didn't watch the entire process, but every time I stepped outside to grab something or check on my still-destroyed porch, another piece of her carefully curated life was being loaded up. By noon, she was gone. There was no farewell, no dramatic final speech. Just an empty house and a neighborhood that felt lighter than it had in years. The HOA was officially under new leadership, the criminal investigation was underway, and the community was finally free of her tyranny. But I wasn't done yet. With Whitney out of the picture, I was determined to make sure nothing like this ever happened again. Owning multiple properties in the neighborhood gave me significant leverage, but I didn't want to rule the HOA the way she had. I wanted to fix it, to put control back into the hands of homeowners who actually cared about the community. The first step was transparency. At the next HOA meeting, we laid everything out. Linda, who had taken over as treasurer, presented a full breakdown of the financial mess Whitney had left behind. There were missing funds, overinflated budgets, and a complete lack of accountability for how money had been spent. Nobody had been keeping track because Whitney had made sure she was the only one with access to the records. That ended immediately. We voted to implement an independent auditing system, ensuring that financial records would be available to all homeowners. No more secret payments, no more unexplained fees. Every dollar spent would be accounted for. Next came the rule changes. Over the years, Whitney had pushed through absurd regulations that gave the HOA unchecked power. We reversed them, one by one. Fines could no longer be issued arbitrarily. Structural modifications to homes couldn't be dictated by the board without homeowner approval. The petty restrictions that had made life miserable for so many people were officially gone. But the real victory came when we addressed the future of the HOA itself. For years, the board had operated as an exclusive club, with Whitney handpicking her replacements whenever someone left. That changed with a new election system that ensured board members were chosen by the entire neighborhood, not just a select few. Nobody would ever be able to seize total control like she had. The meeting ended on a hopeful note. People who had once been too afraid to speak up were now actively participating. Neighbors who had barely spoken to each other were coming together to rebuild what Whitney had nearly destroyed. As I closed my folder and got ready to leave, Greg approached. He looked different than he had the last time we spoke, more relaxed, like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He admitted that he had spent years defending Whitney's actions because he had convinced himself she knew what she was doing. But seeing the neighborhood come together without her made him realize how much damage she had really done. I told him the past didn't matter. What mattered was that he was willing to make things right now. By the time I got home, I finally allowed myself to take a breath. For the first time in months, my house felt like mine again. I still had a destroyed porch to rebuild, but I wasn't in a rush. I stepped onto the grass, looking toward the homes I now owned on Whitney's former street. I had planned to hold on to the properties as rentals, but with everything settled, I decided to sell a few back to homeowners who wanted to stay. People deserve to have control over their own homes. As the sun set, casting warm light across the neighborhood, I realized something. Whitney had spent years trying to turn this place into her own personal kingdom. But in the end, she had only succeeded in uniting the community against her. And that was a legacy she'd never escape.